4 things to think about. Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Walking with Randy, where we talk about writing, speaking, coaching, marketing, and marriage. Today's another topic on writing, and so we're talking about writing I said nonfiction novel, I said that wrong. Writing the fiction novel. Well, you'd say, aren't most novels fiction? First of all, think of your characters. Now, you're certainly going to have a main character, and since your reader is going to be spending a lot of time with that character, it should be someone that you would want to spend some time with. So at least make him in that regard. And as I mentioned in an earlier video, I think you should also give your character at least one flaw, something I struggle with, to make it a little more interesting. I mean, after all, Superman has his kryptonite, does he not? So make your main character have at least one flaw. And then you can think about your other characters. You don't necessarily have to make them to be the kind that you would want to spend a lot of time with. In fact, if you can write a character that kind of makes you mad, that might be all right too. Then your characters should be different. Contrast your characters in their personalities and contrast them to each other, different characters. But think about your characters. And then think of your stories. Now, I'm going to talk about a main story, and not all novels have this, but many times they talk about having plots and subplots, or I've heard it like this: maybe you would have a main story and a secondary story. And then, if you do have a main story and a secondary story, you can flip back and forth between those two, and at some point they will probably intersect. So your main story and your secondary story. Now, talking about the stories within the story, on the main story, you actually have 2 stories going on with that. You have the external story, which are the events that are taking place. And I talked before about how that you start with the character's real life, and then he goes on a downward slope, and then it's like he hits rock bottom, or at least he comes to a point of a definite decision, and maybe it is a point of no return. And then he starts going on the upward slope, seeking his victory, and there are obstacles along the way on the upward slope. And then finally there's victory, and you tie it all together at the end. Well, that is the outward story of your main story, the events. But there is also the inward story, and that is the emotional part that a person cannot see. You tell how the character feels, or show how the character feels, the struggles that the character has. So you have the external story, internal story, and then you may have a main story and a secondary story, or maybe even some more smaller stories. And at some point your main story and your secondary story intersect. Well, and if you don't have a secondary story, you still have stories within the story, because you have the outer story and the inner story, dealing with the events and the struggles. Then think of the need to get something down. Think of the need to get the rough draft done. One of the ways to do that is write quickly. I have just written a book, and it's called How to Write a Book in 28 Days or Less Without Stressing Yourself to Death. Book, in that case, is defined as having your rough draft done and your first round of editing done. And so I show some techniques in being able to do that. But basically, write in 5 to 10 minute segments, write as quickly as you can, have your story planned out where you can do that. So think of the need of getting the rough draft done. And the reason for that is you can't edit something unless you have something to edit. So we've talked about 3 things to think about so far. You think about your characters, think about your stories, think about the need to get the rough draft done quickly, and then think of the need to edit. Now, you need to go through and do your self-edit first. And as you're going through and doing your self-edit, I would suggest that if possible, you find places to insert more humor if you didn't already get it in there. And I see, okay, I see now there's a little note on the screen that's never been there before, and it said you can now add up to 3 guests to your broadcast. Well, sorry I didn't have time to invite you to join me. But think of the need to edit so you can add humor. Then you can go through and sprinkle throughout more interest factors. Go through and eliminate unnecessary words. See where it is bogging down. And then maybe even add more cliffhangers to your story. And so you go through and edit yourself, and then it should be ready for a professional edit. And you would have at least 2 rounds of that professional edit. And there you go. You're ready to have your novel, ready to have it published. Well, been another session of Walking with Randy. Glad to spend this time with you. And as I mentioned the book earlier, How to Write a Book in 28 Days or Less Without Stressing Yourself to Death. If you would like more writing tips like these, you can go to randycarney.com, Carney spelled with a C, randycarney.com, and you'll get more writing tips. And then, of course, I would recommend that you go check out the book, How to Write a Book in 28 Days or Less Without Stressing Yourself to Death. And you just go to Amazon, type in How to Write a Book in 28 Days, and I think when you get that far, it'll be on the first 2 or 3 results. I'm happy to say that whenever the Kindle version of that came out on the first day of launch week, it did hit the bestseller list. So go check out the book, How to Write a Book in 28 Days or Less. Well, it's good to be with you. Until another session of Walking with Randy, I want you to remember, you can write a book.